You've probably seen it a million times in paintings and movies. It's one of the most iconic scenes in all of history. Jesus, at this final meal with his closest friends, drops a bombshell. One of you is about to betray me. But how exactly did that moment play out? Well, for centuries, it's looked like there's a major contradiction in the accounts. So let's dive in and see if we can solve this puzzle together. Okay, so here's the heart of the matter. On one hand, you have the Gospel of Matthew, which makes it sound like a really public confrontation. Jesus seems to call out Judas directly. But then you read the Gospel of John, and it paints a completely different picture. It's a quiet, private whisper where only one other person even knows what's happening. So what's the deal? Was it a public smackdown or a secret message? Look, we have 4 key witnesses to this thing: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Their accounts are the bedrock of the entire story. But if they seem to tell it 2 different ways, what does that mean? Does the whole story just fall apart? Or could it be that we're just missing a key piece of the puzzle that makes all 4 stories lock together perfectly? To get to the bottom of this, we kind of have to treat it like an investigation. So instead of seeing 4 conflicting reports, let's imagine we have 4 different camera angles on the exact same incredibly dramatic scene. Each one is catching something vital, maybe something the others missed. Right, so each witness brings their own focus. Mark, which is probably the earliest account, gives us the wide shot, the basic tragedy of it all. Then Matthew zooms in, focusing on moral accountability with that direct exchange. Luke kind of shifts the timing, highlighting the shocking contrast between grace and betrayal. And then you have John, who goes for the intimate close-up, focusing on the secret signals and whispers. So, how on earth do we make sense of all these different angles? Well, the breakthrough, the real aha moment, comes when we dig up a couple of crucial clues from the ancient world that honestly change everything. They don't just solve the puzzle, they show us a story that's way richer than we ever thought. And here they are. First, you gotta remember that ancient writers weren't like modern court reporters. Someone like Matthew might summarize a conversation to get to the point, while John would give you this super detailed moment-by-moment replay. And second, and this is the real game changer, they weren't sitting in chairs like we do. The seating arrangement itself is a massive clue. Okay, so picture this. Forget the famous painting with everyone on one side of a long table. At a formal meal back then, you'd recline on couches around a U-shaped table. You'd lean on your left elbow, which means your head was right next to the person beside you. So it's very likely that John, the beloved disciple, was literally right next to Jesus, close enough to lean back and whisper. Peter, though, was probably across the way, too far to be discreet, which is why he had to get John's attention. And crucially, Judas was also right there, close to Jesus. And here's the proof in the pudding. John flat out tells us that even after Jesus said something to Judas, and Judas got up and left, the rest of the disciples were totally clueless. They had no idea what was going on. This is huge. It confirms that the identification of Judas was not some big public announcement. It was quiet, it was contained. All right, so now that we have the clues, we can actually piece this whole scene together. It's like we're syncing up all 4 camera feeds to create one unified timeline of how it all went down. So picture it. Jesus drops the bombshell announcement. The room erupts in chaos and confusion, with everyone looking at themselves asking, "Is it me?" In the middle of all this, Peter, from across the table, catches John's eye and signals him. John leans back into Jesus' personal space and asks the question privately. Jesus doesn't shout the answer, he just performs a simple, quiet action. He gives a piece of bread to Judas. Judas leaves, and everyone else is still scratching their heads. And just like that, every detail from all 4 Gospels fits perfectly. No contradiction. But you know, solving the logistical puzzle is really just the beginning. The real power, the thing that gives you chills, is the drama that was happening just beneath the surface. A story of incredible grace, shocking treachery, and the deepest parts of the human heart. Now get this. The fact that Judas was close enough for Jesus to hand him that piece of bread means he was probably sitting in a seat of honor, right next to the host. Think about that for a second. Jesus, knowing full well what Judas is about to go do, still gives him one of the best seats in the house. It's an absolutely mind-blowing act of grace. And the bread itself? That's not just a casual gesture. In that culture, for a host to dip a piece of bread and give it to a guest was a huge deal. It was a public sign of friendship, of honor, of a special bond. Which leads to the most crucial point. Jesus' very last, up-close, personal action toward his own betrayer was not an angry accusation. It wasn't a public condemnation. It was one last powerful offer of friendship, a fellowship extended right up until the very end. And yet, in what has to be one of the most chilling lines ever written, John tells us what happened right after that. It was at that precise moment, after receiving this final offer of friendship, that Judas fully committed. The grace was offered, it was rejected, and the deal was sealed. But what about the other guys? Their reaction is just as amazing. When Jesus says there's a traitor in the room, not one of them points a finger. Not a single one looks at Judas and says, "It's him." Instead, every single one of them looks inward, at their own heart, and asks, "Lord, is it me?" That's a staggering moment of humility. And all of this sets up the story's ultimate contrast, because both Peter and Judas failed Jesus massively that night. But the critical lesson here isn't about the failure. It's about what happened next. It's about the response. Peter, completely broken, eventually chose repentance. Judas chose despair. When Judas leaves the room, John ends the scene with 3 simple, powerful words. And it was night. Now, he's not just telling you the time. In his gospel, light is always connected to Jesus, to God. And darkness, that's spiritual separation. So when Judas walked out that door, he wasn't just walking into the dark street. He was stepping out of the light and into a much, much deeper darkness. Okay, so we've pieced together the puzzle. We've explored the incredible depth of what happened. But what does any of this mean for us, right here, right now? Let's bring it home. I think there are 3 really powerful things we can take from this. First is the humility of the disciples, that willingness to look at ourselves first. Second is just gratitude for a kind of grace that's so ridiculously big, it offers friendship to its own betrayer. And third, it's a call to be faithful, to stay at the table, to stick with Christ even when we're confused and don't have all the answers. And in the end, it all comes back to that one haunting question the disciples asked. It's a question that echoes down through 2,000 years, right from that dinner table into our own hearts. It's an invitation, not to judge the people around us, but to have the courage to look in the mirror and ask with real honesty, is it I?